Next item, clerk.
We're going to number 5, number 7715, sub A.
Chairman Keable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 7715, substitute A by yourself, would create the new crime of delivery resulting in death. This bill would clear up a gray area in the law. Let me tell you how this gray area came to light. On a cold night in February 2015, Kristen Corso, who struggled with a substance use disorder, was sitting at home. She was recently dismissed from a 30-day treatment facility because insurance had stopped paying, not because her or her family wanted her home. She texted her drug dealer, Lucky. He met Kristen on a side street in Cranston and sold her a single dose of heroin. Kristen paid Lucky with 2 crisp $20 bills, and he left in his gold Audi. Kristen didn't know her heroin was laced with fentanyl. Kristen took her heroin and died, alone, on a cold side street, in her mother's car, within seconds. Kristen's dealer was charged with felony murder. For those non-lawyers, felony murder is a legal doctrine going back hundreds of years that states if a death occurs during the perpetration of a felony, you can be charged with murder because you caused that death. Back to our gray area. What does during the perpetration mean? Lucky had driven off by the time Kristen had overdosed. Was that during the perpetration? This bill seeks to clear up that gray area. 35 states have already taken this step. Felony murder carries with it a mandatory life sentence. This bill does not go that far. This bill carries with it a sentence of up to life. That gives the judge discretion. It gives the prosecutor wiggle room in plea negotiations. It is the same penalty that you get for second-degree murder. This bill furthers 2 public policy concerns. First, it discourages drug dealing. Anyone that thinks that law enforcement doesn't play a role in reducing drug use is naive. Second, it carries expanded Good Samaritan protections for delivery. We want to encourage people to call for help. If Lucky had been with Kristen when she took her poison and called for help, he would have been immune from prosecution. This House has taken great efforts to fight the opioid epidemic. We have passed Chairman Craven's Good Samaritan law. The House has twice passed Chairwoman Serpa's bill calling for greater coverage of residential treatment. That might have saved Kristen. We have placed limits on prescribing opioids. We have passed a non-opioid directive. We have passed partial fill on prescriptions for opioids. No one wants to punish people who are struggling with addiction and who are seeking help. We do want to say to all the families out there that have been devastated by this scourge that we hear you. We are going to do something about it. We are going to hold people accountable. Mr. Speaker, I move passage of this important piece of legislation.
Chairman Keable moves passage. That is seconded by Representative Natalillo, Representative Solomon, Representative Cunha, Representative Price, Whip Edwards, Representative Coughlin, Representative Casey, Representative Johnston, Representative McLaughlin, Chairman McNamara, Chairman Corvese, Chairman Azanaro, Representative Marshall, Representative Canario, Deputy Speaker Lima, Chairman Abney, Representative Amori, Representative Ackerman, Leader Shikachi, Representative Casimiro, Chairman Jacquard, Representative McAtee, Chairman Craven, Chairwoman Fogarty, Representative Ucci. Proceed with your amendment, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, the intent of this bill is not to punish people that are low-level offenders. I therefore move LC 004307/10.
Chairman Keable moves amendment LC 004307/10. That is seconded by Representative Solomon. Whip Edwards, Representative Johnston, Representative McLaughlin, Chairman McNamara, Chairman Corvese, Chairman Azanaro, Representative Diaz, Representative Marshall, Representative Cunha, Representative Canario, Chairman Abney, Leader Shikachi, Representative Casimiro, Representative Amori, Representative Reaganberg, Chairman Handy, Representative Knight, Chairwoman Ruggiero, Representative McAtee, Chairman Craven, Chairwoman Fogarty, Representative Casey, Representative Blazejewski. Proceed with your explanation, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment would would clarify that in exchange for value does not apply to the act of sharing a controlled substance. The committee did hear testimony that very frequently people that are addicted to drugs will share their drugs. That is not the behavior that we are going after with this bill, and this amendment would clarify that.
On the amendment, clerk unlock the machine. There are no lights. All in favor, please vote green. Those opposed, red. Clerk, lock the machine. 70 in favor, 0 opposed. The amendment prevails. Back on the act. There are no lights. Representative Regenberg. Actually, there's not many. Representative Walsh, our only light.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker and honorable colleagues, I stand today in opposition of this bill. The opioid epidemic is a cause that is deeply personal to me. As many of you know, my older brother Thomas has been a heroin addict for most of my adult life. For those of you who live in communities that are newly affected by this epidemic, our thoughts are with you. This is terrifying, uncharted territory for a lot of you. For those of us living in poorer communities, this is an epidemic we've been dealing with for years. I want to start by saying that I attack ideas and not people. As the late Justice Antonin Scalia used to say, sometimes very good people have some very bad ideas. This legislation is bad. It is emotionally charged. It was crafted without the input of the medical community or any of the other invested parties. This crisis is growing, and sponsors of this bill are afraid of the damage that deadly drugs are having in their communities. I hear you, I understand, and I acknowledge where you're coming from. This bill, however, represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the opioid epidemic. While I have vast personal experience on the subject and a very healthy understanding of addiction, I won't ask you to take my word for it. Take the word of the Center for Prisoner Health and Human Rights, the ACLU, the Medical Society, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Center, the DARE, the recovery organization RI Cares, Parent Support Network, an organization that literally supports parents who have children with substance abuse issues, the Public Defender's Office, the Mental Health Association, the Rhode Island Health Institute, the Center for Justice, the Coalition for Recovery Housing, the Drug Policy Alliance, Protect Families First, Project Weber, and Students for a Sensible Drug Policy are all opposed to this bill. I'm not a lawyer, nor would I ever walk into a courtroom and suggest that I know better than the seasoned professionals there by shouting my objection. Why then are we, as lawyers, waitresses, police officers, and teachers, going against the advice of the medical community on a medical crisis? Why aren't we listening to doctors when crafting these bills when they are the professionals who treat these cases day in and day out? This is the second bill offered by the Attorney General, whose solution to this crisis seems to be to incarcerate all of those affected by it. This is not an effort to stymie the opioid epidemic, but an attempt to hide it behind bars. We've dedicated no extra resources to rehabs. We haven't sat down with affected families and asked for their input. We've had no study commission. Our first two bills seek to incarcerate. This will save no lives, it will ruin them. Now for a few facts. This law will not incarcerate drug kingpins who are knowingly peddling fentanyl laced with heroin. The person who wakes up beside a dead drug user is not a drug kingpin, but an addict themselves. The young woman who overdoses on heroin doesn't do it in her drug dealer's apartment. She does it in her bedroom beside her equally addicted boyfriend. This bill will ensure that no one will take advantage of our Good Samaritan laws for fear that they will be charged. This law will not incarcerate the Rhode Island Scarface. Rather, it will incarcerate Thomas. Will this legislation stop people from using fentanyl-laced heroin? No. All heroin being shared around the state is currently made of fentanyl. If any of you had bothered to ask a heroin addict, you would know. They would tell you. Furthermore, more than 80% of heroin users started with a perfectly legal painkiller prescription. Does this bill charge doctors who are overprescribing? No, it does not. If 80% of our addicts start at the doctor's office, shouldn't our legislative fight begin there too? Even if we eliminate every heroin peddler in the state, won't we still have new addicts being generated every day in their doctor's appointments? Finally, as I was trying to persuade my colleagues to vote no, I heard overwhelmingly that this was a bad piece of legislation, but that they were afraid. And I want to finish by saying this. Bravery is not brave if you aren't terrified when you're doing it. If it wasn't scary, it wouldn't be bravery. I want to urge my colleagues who may be voting yes out of fear to consider that they will be they need to be brave. The people suffering in our communities need you to be brave. If you choose to walk on this bill, do it knowing that you are sentencing hundreds of Rhode Islanders to a life in prison when their crime was trusting their medical professionals to take care of them. And finally, to my brother Thomas, who I'm positive is not watching right now, no matter what the final vote tally is, I love you and you are not a murderer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Chippendale.
Thank you, Speaker. I think probably everyone in this room has only one degree of separation from either an addict who's currently struggling or perhaps someone who has unfortunately succumbed. I think probably everyone in this room can relate to that on a lot of levels. I want to share a story, and this is a story that I shared with a former colleague who was working at the Providence Center. It does a lot of great work to help treat folks with substance abuse issues. I told this story to her, and she implored me, please share this story with as many people as you can. Share this story with Tom Coderre, who, as we know, is very instrumental in leading this charge. Tom also said, Chip, you got to share this. So I want to share it. I, for reasons that are inconsequential, found myself in an emergency room at Miriam Hospital a couple of months ago. And as you know, there's not a lot of privacy in there. You just have a curtain that divides you from the folks in the next area. And you can't help but overhear things. And shortly after I was settled in, a team came in with a patient, and it was a young lady. I could tell by her voice. And she had just been revived with naloxone, with Narcan. She was an addict, and she overdosed, and the ambulance came and saved her life. And they brought her into the hospital, and again, hearing everything going on, I heard the doctors do what doctors do. They save lives. And then I heard a recovered addict from the Providence Center come in and speak with this young lady on a level that only these two people at that moment in that room could understand, because they had walked in one another's shoes. And I very clearly heard the conversation about, I was with my boyfriend, we were offered fentanyl, specifically said fentanyl, and we were both very curious about it. And regrettably, she tried it and she had an overdose on her first try. She went on to speak with this counselor, and tell her that she was very aware and very grateful for the Good Samaritan law because she felt she would not have survived. By the time this peer counselor, I think is what her title was done speaking with this young woman, she had enlisted in a program. She was talking about her future. She was talking about getting away from the lifestyle that she was trapped in because she knew where it was going to lead. She had just died. And I found that to be particularly poignant in that setting. And I also found it to give me hope because there are organizations out there that are working to help these people who are struggling so dearly, so hard, and it's so terribly. And she did speak about understanding the fact that no one was going to go to jail by calling the paramedics. My concern is this: in this bubble in which we legislate, we get into the weeds on these bills. We understand what a carve-out is. We understand what an exemption is. We understand the difference between may and shall. But I'm here to tell you that a person who's addicted to a substance like an opiate or an opioid cares about one thing, and that's the next fix, because that's the only thing their brain cares about. Eating, using the facilities, and showering, those things are incidental. They don't matter. All they care about is getting the next fix. So what happens when word hits the street that you can go to jail for life because of this, that? They're not going to get into the weeds on the carve-outs. They're not going to get, well, if you're not a dealer, if there's no consideration. Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of consideration that goes on in these exchanges. The word is going to be on the streets, you will go to jail for life.
30 seconds.
My fear is when that person who overdosed in the emergency room next to me and the other folks in the apartment with her felt strong enough to call the police because they knew they wouldn't get prosecuted, when this word gets out on the street, they're not going to parse all of the language we have in this bill. That's all they're going to think, and when the person next to them starts to go into an overdose, they're going to leave because they don't want to go to jail for life. My fear is we're going to kill more people with this bill, and that is where I stand in my position of opposition. Thank you, Speaker.
Representative McLaughlin.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, I wasn't going to say anything, but no, basically, I'm in support of this bill. I'll tell you why. You know, when you have a family member or a spouse, which I had, okay? My brother was a heroin addict, all right? His own friends left him for dead. He had overdosed, okay? I remember that night, it was clear, okay? I got there and but for the grace of God, you know, they saved him. You think they cared? No, they didn't care. You know, the people that supported him. And for you young people that are standing up there right now, anybody that tries to sell you drugs, just say no. And it sounds stupid, but I'll tell you what, they're not your friends, they're trying to kill you. Thank you.
Representative Ranglin-Vassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I only have a few points. I just want to extend my heartfelt sympathies to the families who have lost loved ones to heroin addiction, and to my colleague, her own brother. I really want to extend my thoughts and my prayers to you. It's such a brave thing to get up into, in a public way, talk about your family. I just want to share 3 points that I've been thinking about for a while now in regards to this bill. I want to bring all of our attention, number 1 point, to the war on drugs. And when that started, what the war on drugs has done to so many families in our communities, mostly black and brown people. We have torn apart families like crazy. And my only problem is, are we willing to make the same mistake again, to disseminate and lose generations of people based on this so-called war on drugs? This is a tough, very complicated issue. and it should not be taken lightly. For people who have an addiction, it's real. It is not trumped up, it's not made up. But we're talking about families here, we're talking about kids, and we're also talking about low-level offenders, mothers, many of them, who are still locked up right now because of the war and drugs. And it's for those very reasons why I cannot, in good conscience, support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Regenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got really strong concerns with this legislation, and I want to, at the outset, acknowledge and recognize the really good intentions that I know are behind this proposal. We've got an overdose crisis. It's a crisis in this state, and we need to take urgent action to address that. And this proposal is taking urgent action, and that's a good thing. But I think we need to take the right kind of action that's actually going to help address the problem and not exacerbate or make it worse. And for me, the unintended negative consequences of this legislation, I think, can do just that. To echo my colleagues' comments, we should be clear with our terminology. This is a doubling down of the war on drugs. And the war on drugs has not been a success. It has not been successful at reducing the amount of drugs in our streets. It's not been successful at reducing the levels of addictions in our neighborhoods. It's not been successful at reducing the number of these tragic overdoses by our neighbors. What it's been very effective at is contributing to a system of mass incarceration that, as Rep. Ranglin-Vassell said, has been tearing young, low-level offenders away from their families, has been undermining the foundation of many of our communities like Mount Hope in my district and neighborhoods across our state, and has been putting huge amounts of our state resources into locking people up, not investing in rehabilitation, not investing in making our communities stronger. Our state right now spends more on corrections than we spend on public higher education. That's a reality right now, and I think it's a shame. And locking up more low-level offenders for life is going to exacerbate that. And we know in particular who it's disproportionately going to impact. Even though drug use, drug crimes are relatively evenly distributed in our population, we know that because of disproportionate surveillance, because of unfair arrest and sentencing practices, it is disproportionately people of color who are taken from their families and put for these long sentences and warehoused in prisons. And again, those concerns aren't coming from any of us in this room. Those are coming from the folks who are on the ground, the experts in the medical, the public health, the treatment and prevention communities who are doing this work every day to save lives that they can, are seeing what works and what doesn't. A particular concern that has come up again and again from the folks who know what they're talking about is who this legislation is targeted at. Again, if we were talking about the kingpins, the folks who are making decisions to cut illicit products with fentanyl to make more money and lead to deaths, then we need the most robust and severe response. But that's not who this legislation is going to target. And so I think that we could narrow it, we could make the legislation more appropriate so it's actually going to those folks that are more behind the crisis. And so at the appropriate time, Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment that I'd like to move.
Proceed.
I would like to move amendment LC 004307/8.
Representative Regenberg moves amendment LC 004307/8. That is seconded by Representative Almeida, Representative Hull, Representative O'Grady, Representative Agello. Proceed. And Representative Welch. Proceed. Representative Lombardi. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this amendment would do is exempt from this extended, potentially life sentence, people who are themselves drug addicted. Now, we know that a huge number and proportion of folks involved in the drug trade have experience on both sides. Someone who might be at a low level selling a drug one day might the next day be succumbing to an overdose. It's often the same people. It's two sides of the same coin, two faces of the same person. And just like we have sympathy and we want justice for someone on the overdose side, when it's that same person who is not to make a big profit, but to feed their addiction, as Rep. Chippendale said, when you only have that one focus, you're doing anything to feed that addiction, and often that is low-level drug sales. I think that that's not the target that that we want to be talking about here. We know that these are folks that need rehabilitation, they need treatment, they need services. It is not in any of our interest to be warehousing them in prison for potentially life sentences at, by the way, huge cost to our state and to taxpayers. This legislation would try to narrow that and make, I think, this overall proposal a lot more amenable for many of us. So I would urge my colleagues to consider and support this way to make sure that we are not talking about folks who are trapped in their own web of addiction and sending them to prison for life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I've got a bunch of lights. Are the lights on the amendment? Anyone who's not on the amendment, please turn your light off for now. Chairman Corvesi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I believe this amendment is extremely problematic. While it may be well-intentioned, the definition of a drug-addicted person is very broad and would apply to many individuals who are delivering or trafficking illegal drugs. The phrase, a person who exhibits a maladaptive pattern of behavior resulting from drug use, including one or more of the following: impaired control over drug use, compulsive use, and or continued use despite harm and craving. This definition is also overly broad and would effectively nullify the law and its potential to charge drug dealers and traffickers. This would cause a battle of the experts as to whether the defendant qualifies as a drug-addicted person. And more importantly, more to the point, there is no other section of criminal law where we excuse a person from criminal habits or activity due to being a drug addict. It would be akin to allowing an individual who's charged with DUI, death resulting, and letting them plead to something less. We don't do that with individuals who are alcoholics. We shouldn't do that with individuals who are drug addicted. And with regard to the victim in with these cases, an individual who dies through the mediation of a drug addict, that death is no less egregious than an individual dying in a DUI where it's mediated by an alcoholic at the wheel. I would ask my colleagues to please to oppose this amendment and to vote for the bill as stated.
Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was going to make this comment on the bill, but I think the amendment's a better opportunity to do it. I agree with the amendment. I have problems with this bill as a whole. I'll be voting against it. But one thing that really I can't get past, I think this amendment, although I think it's actually the amendments in Section 3, my real comments about Section 11-23-6. If this bill passes, and I think this amendment should be extended to the other section, is my point, you could have a situation where two 17-year-old friends who are drug addicts or trying drugs, and one of the friends delivers drugs to their friend. And yes, Representative McLaughlin, you're right. It's a bad thing, but we're talking about kids do stupid things, okay? They deliver drugs, and the friend overdoses and dies. We are going to mandate, no discretion, we're going to mandate a life sentence for the kid's 17-year-old friend. I just can't get past that. And there's a whole lot of other arguments that can be made against this bill, and I'll let other people make them. But this is one of the most draconian pieces of legislation I've seen in this chamber in 10 years. I hope we support the amendment, but that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to spend any more on the bill. It's a terrible piece of legislation.
Chairman Keable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in opposition to this amendment, and I'd like to address both two issues, one on the amendment and one on Representative Newberry. This bill does not mandate a life sentence. The original bill was a mandatory life sentence. The committee, hearing the concerns of the community out there, did a substitute A. This is up to life. The judge has discretion. So I think I think Representative Newberry was wrong about that. On the amendment, I understand it is well-intentioned. It's a good point. But the fact that someone was a drug-addicted person is better taken into account when the prosecutor is making charging decisions, when they're talking about a plea bargain. If, if the person is convicted, the judge will use his or her discretion, take that into account. Are we dealing with someone who themselves had a substance abuse problem? That's where that issue is better addressed, not with this amendment. So I urge its defeat.
Representative Newberry.
Real quickly, you're correct in section 11-23-7, it's up to life. My comment was about section 11-23-6, where the existing languages shall be imprisoned for life. It has to do with resulting death of minor. It's a little different, but it is a mandatory sentence, and that was the point of my comment.
Is that before us?
Well, the language that I'm talking about is existing, but we're making changes to that section, which change it from sale to convicted of sale to delivers or distributes. One kid gets the heroin from somebody else, gives it to his friend, he's delivered it. So he's now a mandatory life sentenced at age 17.
Okay. Representative Regenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had a couple thoughts and responses that I think are relevant. First of all, I just want to make clear as far as the actual language and its broadness or its, I think, and I appreciated Rep. Corvesi's comments, but I think he said that there's no other criminal statute that operates like this. This language wasn't just drawn out of thin air. It was actually pretty much copied from the Federal Uniform Controlled Substances Act. In the Federal Uniform Controlled Substances Act, there is very literally this language when it comes to creating different sentencing guidelines, possibilities for delivery, and specifically saying that drug-addicted people should be subject to lower sentencing. So again, this amendment would not say that that drug-addicted people are exempt from any criminal statute. It says they're exempt from the addition of a potential life sentence. I think it's worth pointing out that in the case that this bill is named after, the person in question was convicted of a 40-year sentence, I believe, under existing law. So this legislation doesn't touch that, or this amendment doesn't touch that. It simply says that drug-addicted people who are not necessarily in it for the profit, they're in it to feed this habit, they need service and rehabilitation and treatment, that they are exempt from a full life sentence. Thank you.
Chairman Craven.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in opposition of this amendment. I agree with Chairman Keable, it's well intended. But the analogy used for why drug addiction would be an exemption to the application of this statute, in the source from which Representative Regenberg got that, are two different areas of the law, not just federal and state. What Representative Regenberg is quoting is the federal sentencing guidelines. You don't get to that place until you've pled or been convicted. And at that point in time, as is appropriate, not only in the federal system, but also in the state system, which is, I think, part of the reason why having this law, but having to trust judges and probation officers that they'll see a person for what they really are if there is a drug addiction issue. But in the federal side, everything is very much codified. The federal sentencing guidelines are like a math equation, something that I wasn't particularly good at. That's why I became a lawyer. So it doesn't apply in this situation as an analogy to why this bill is necessary to be able to prosecute, ferret out, and be able to stop the folks that are delivering drugs, fentanyl in particular, that have been responsible in 2017 for the death of 336 people, of which 63% of them died from fentanyl. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was, like Representative Newberry, going to talk about this on the bill, but this is a good spot as any. Some of you may be like me, which is on the fence. And you should all know I voted against this bill in committee. And I'm going to vote for it today. And here's why. Because we put in the amendment regarding sharers. This is a really, really super complicated issue and a nightmare public policy issue to get at a solution. And it's not one or the other. It's not treatment and medical intervention only, and it's not judges, cops, and jail only. It's a combination of the two. There are people out there who profit from the sale of narcotics who do not care who they kill, but they put the money in their back pocket. That's what the jail side is for. There are people out there who are in the grips of addiction and wrecked lives, and that's what the treatment side is for. And for me, the line is who sells and who doesn't. This amendment that's up here today, I mean, it's certainly well-intentioned, and I've kicked this around in my head for about the last 5 days. I'm opposed to the amendment, but Representative Regenberg is absolutely right. This language is present in our current controlled substance law because we carve out in the delivery law we already have. If you're a dealer, if you just deliver, like in Representative Newberry's example, if you just deliver and we just charge you with delivery, it's up to life as it is today. Nobody has to die. No, it's like a 20 piece of crack across the tape, boom, that's up to life. If you're drug addicted in that statute and you deliver that 20 piece of crack, it's up to 30 years. We've built the mitigation into the statute, but we've still called the delivery criminal. And I think that's probably the right way to go. We've told judges and prosecutors this is a mitigating fact, but we haven't completely carved out that person out of the entire criminal code, because there may be times when that is appropriate. So if you're on the fence like me, I think the sharer amendment brightens that line between dealers and users. That's why I voted for that one. I'm going to vote against one. I'm going to vote for the bill. Thank you.
Representative Regenberg.
I would just add that I have the utmost respect for Chairman Craven, and his point is well taken. I would just say that I think that's exactly the point. In the federal system, they say we're taking the discretion out of it, and we want these different populations treated differently. This amendment is about taking the discretion out and saying that if we think these populations should be treated differently, if we think kingpins and folks who are struggling with addiction themselves and feeding their habit are different, then instead of leaving it to the discretion of a system that we know has biases, that we know can disproportionately impact communities of color, let's take that discretion out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Chippendale.
Thank you, Speaker. I just want to seize on this debate because it's been a great exchange. We had a point that was brought up that I got the feeling that some folks in this room didn't even anticipate when it was raised. And that goes to the point I was making earlier, where if you're a person on the streets who's addicted, they don't understand the arguments we're having here. They don't care. So again, the concern is, while we are having carve-outs and we're having exemptions and the word on the street will be, you can get life in prison. That's the only thing people will remember. That's the only thing. And we're very educated on the topic because we've been immersed in it for so long. And we still have some disagreements and disagreements on even what the law says or what the bill says. The only thing someone on the street is going to remember is life in prison. And I'm afraid they're going to turn their backs on someone who's on the ground next to them. That's my concern. Thank you.
Representative McLaughlin.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I'm going to conclude with, basically, until you've lived with it, the drug dealers, like Representative Knight said, it's all about money. It's all about addiction. People get addicted, but guess what? They're their own worst enemies. But you young people that are standing here today, there's a thing called responsibility, okay? There again, the responsibility for your actions. You have choices in this world. We all do, And that's what it comes down to, I saw my brother die, all right? You do drugs, guess what? The end result is death, period, all right? And the people that you associated with it, they get hooked, but guess what? It all starts off with giving someone a bag, okay? Or giving someone a hit. It's the IOU system. They put you on the IOU system. How do you like it? And when you get hooked, but when you go back, it pertains to the drug dealers, okay, and money, and being used and abused, and families being destroyed. Please vote for this bill. Thank you.
On the amendment, clerk, unlock the machine. All those in favor, please vote green. Those opposed, red. Has everyone in their seat voted? Clerk, lock the machine. 14 in favor, 56 opposed. The amendment fails. Back on the act. Whip Philippi.
Chairman, yield, please.
He will yield. Proceed.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Chairman, for yielding. Even though we've passed this amendment, I have a scenario which I'd like to ask if an individual would still come under the ambit of this bill. As we know, many people who are addicted to heroin use it in groups. You could have 4 or 5 people who use daily, and every day it's one of their turns to go down the street or across the city line to go pick up the heroin for the group to use. Now, if everyone in the group gives that individual $10, that individual goes, picks up the heroin, brings it, gives it to the people who gave him the $10, and they all get high together, and someone dies, would that individual who went across the city line or picked up the drugs and brought it back, would they still be covered by this bill?
I think that would probably constitute sharing, but that would be an issue that the prosecutor looking at it and looking at the totality of the facts. I mean, it's great to be in law school again and to put the hypothetical out there, but the reality is the real life situation would have facts far more in depth than that. They would look at the totality of the circumstances, what was going on with this group, and make a charging decision. But I think under that scenario, probably not. But that's a law school question with this many facts, Representative.
I appreciate that, Chairman Keable, but it's actually how many people do use. It's not a law school hypothetical. It's actually what's going on the ground. Well, and many people share like this because they know going to pick up drugs is dangerous. And if there's a group of people, all 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 don't go to pick up the drugs. One person does, and they pool their money.
Let me add this. Before we came to the floor, I was speaking with the legislative liaison to the Attorney General's office, who you know very well from committee, Ms. Lindbeck. She told me that in the past decade, there have only been 2 factual scenarios where the Attorney General's office would have sought to charge somebody under this. Kristen's case, Kristen Corso being one of them. So again, you know, I can't say with certainty, absolutely not, but given the fact pattern that you just presented, given the amendment that we passed at the beginning, I think the answer is no.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. And as we both learned in law school, reasonable minds can differ, and I think we do differ on this point, because my concern is that someone would come under the delivery section. Even though they're not making a profit off it, there's still an exchange of cash for the illicit substance. And that's how many people are using today. And if this bill was go after the people who are cutting the heroin with fentanyl, going after the traffickers, lock the people up and throw away the key. But the concern I have, and I think the concern of many people in this room, is you have people caught in vicious cycles of addiction who aren't thinking rationally, who are addicts, and it's their turn to go get the drugs today. And to bring them under this, I think it's very different than someone who's a trafficker or the one who's importing and cutting the drugs with fentanyl. I don't want to go after the street-level guy. I don't want to go after the addict. I want to go after the trafficker. In many respects, the war on drugs has been a failure in this country. I think if anyone really wants to see how the inverse has worked, research what's happened in Portugal once they decriminalized many drugs, most drugs actually. I think with heroin, if you have less than a 10-day supply, it's been decriminalized. Their rates of overdoses have massively been reduced, I think somewhere around 90%. HIV transmission from intravenous use has massively gone down because they realized that addiction is a mental disorder. Addiction is a health issue. It's not a criminal issue. The only victim is yourself. If you're a dealer, that's very different. But a user, an addict, we shouldn't be looking at it any longer as a society as a criminal act. We need to treat them with the mental condition, the mental health problem that they have. And I feel this doubles down on policies from 30 years ago which have failed this country. The war on drugs has been a failure. How do you have a war on your family? How do you have a war on your neighborhood, on your friends, on people we know? The whole concept of the war on drugs is, I think, anathema to a free society. Thank you.
Representative Natalillo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this legislation from a very unique position. Being in funeral service for over 16 years, sitting in the funeral arrangement room with parents, husbands, wives, siblings, their tears running down their face. Yes, as Rep. Knight said, this is a very unique, multifaceted situation that needs to be addressed. But there's no singular approach to this. This is a multifaceted issue. We need to approach this from every angle. And all I can hear echoing in my head over those 16 years, and it's a continuation, and it's a growth, and it keeps growing, is the parents, the siblings, the husbands and wives saying, I wish my loved one didn't interact with the dealer, with the individual who first approached their loved one. And the finality is what sits before me daily, and it increases. I rise in support, and I hope everybody supports this bill. Thank you.
Representative Hull.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in strong opposition to this bill, and I will tell you why. In my 31 years in law enforcement, I've seen both sides of the equation. What's so difficult about this bill? It doesn't get to the root of the problem that we're facing. I commend my colleagues who tried to bring this to the forefront to let us know that we have a problem. But I tell you, I'm there, and I was at one the other night, where a young individual died from an overdose, and we also nabbed the individual who was selling the supposedly drug that he died from, because we don't have the toxicology back. The intent there from the low-lying individual was not the intent to kill that individual. It's feeding the addiction. I don't know where you're at, but we all suffer from some sort of an addiction. I see it. What will trigger your addiction? I don't know. But we all suffer from some shape or form of addiction. But I will tell you this. This bill appeases people, and I will say this right now. I am sorry for everyone that I go to, and I've been to 6 this year. From a high-rise the other night, I am sorry to the parents, and I can't say any more. But if I don't speak out and say that this bill doesn't get to the root of it, nothing will, because we'll leave the chamber, we'll go on our lives, we'll pat ourselves on the back, and we'll say we did something. We did nothing. And I have to get up because I see an injustice, and I have to say something. This is a bad bill, but we can work on it. And I think we really should. Addiction is killing our young people. But most importantly, the people that are selling this, they are grabbing it from people that are bigger than they are, that are introducing that fentanyl, that are killing our children. But it doesn't get there. But we will be happy to know that I got him. But we didn't really get to the root of it. And the root of it is the addiction that most of these people are on, and they will go anywhere to get it. And I'm a law and order guy. I will tell you that. I will lock you up for selling it. And I will put you away, but you need not do life. Because the intent for most of the people I see is not there to really actually kill you. Because the person who's looking for the drug has the addiction. I will end here. We will leave this chamber. This crisis will go on. We will think that we handled it because we passed the law. I apologize to the people who have lost their loved ones. I really do see it every day. But when we pass this law and we leave this chamber, we will not even put a dent in the addiction that's hurting our country and our young individuals. So, Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, I implore you all to vote no, because there's more to this addiction that is killing our individuals. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you, my colleagues.
Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say to Whip Filippi that I greatly appreciate you using some logic and facts in this argument, right? There are medical professionals and mental health professionals who have been working on these issues for their entire careers, and they all oppose this legislation. If we wanted to stymie the opioid crisis, we would be talking to doctors. We would be talking to addicts. We would be talking to therapists and public defenders. We would be talking to the police officers who will be in charge of arresting these individuals. And as we're standing here hearing from all of these people, we are hearing a resounding no. There are things that will curb opioid use, that will decimate overdose numbers. We know them because, again, medical professionals and therapy professionals have been working on this for years. We as lawyers and waitresses do not have the same insights that these medical professionals who are opposing this bill do. I want to remind all of my colleagues who looked at me today and said, I don't like this bill. I wish I could vote no. Do. The only thing stopping you is your fear. Be brave for people like Thomas, who can't be in this room. Be brave, because I can name 10 of you off the top of my head who don't want to do this. So don't do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Canario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My fellow colleagues and Representative Hull, I have the utmost respect for you and your career. However, I have a little bit of different perspective than my colleague, Representative Hull. I spent 10 years in the detective unit and spent many of those years doing narcotics investigations. I know this is a very, very emotionally charged issue. However, we have to do something. We have to do something. We have to get at the root of the problem. The root of the problem is removing the threat. When we have a crisis such as what we're facing, the opioid crisis, we can put all the care we want out there to help the end users, but we have to remove the threat. The threat is not the low-level person that is doing the drugs. The threat is the person who's getting large quantities of these drugs in so they can distribute it. And that's what this bill is aimed at. This bill is aimed at not the low-level user or the person that's going to give it to the next person. This is why this bill gives discretion to the judges up to life in prison, because the judge is going to take those circumstances that are before him and place this and give the sentence accordingly. So the end user that goes before the judge, or a friend that gives it to the individual who passes away, is most likely not going to be the one who's going to be doing life in prison. They want to get to the root of the problem. We have to remove the threat. This is going to give the tools to our judicial system in order to do that. I know how it works. I know how we get to those kingpins. I've done it. I've been there, and I've done it many a times. This is going to work. I have no problem voting for this bill, because I want those people that are bringing the threat and making these opioids available to what I'm going to call victims. We've got to remove that. And this bill does just that. Please vote for this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Almeida. Representative Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I've said it in judiciary. I'm going to say it again. It's been said a few times here on the floor. The war on drugs does not work. My heart goes to Representative McLaughlin, Representative Maura Walsh. Sometimes when we talk about laws or bills, it's good that we can put a face to what we're talking about. Here we have two reps that can explain it better than anybody on this House floor. I, like Representative Hull, I'm retired, been gone, seen it, done that, been there. Opioid. 70s, 80s, early 90s, it was cocaine, heroin. Nobody had no problem then. And how you took some of those big-time dealers away, that there's laws on the books already to do that, to go after these bigger guys and women. The gentleman that is serving a 40-year sentence, I understand he pled out, but there are laws in the books already to do that. Cocaine, heroin, 70s, 80s. Wow, talk about a time capsule. I'm going down that time capsule right now, and I don't see the answer to this bill that, especially the people in the South Side that have gone to war, and in this case, the city of Providence. No. Didn't do anything then, and ain't gonna do nothing now. We need to use the laws that we have on the books today to enforce. But it's true. We go after some of those big-time dealers, we can get them to do 40, 50 years. But what's not being talked about, the more people you send up into prison, the more money it's going to cost the state of Rhode Island. There was a former addict. She was just walking around here, and there was a few others. Clean, well-spoken. She deserves a pat on the back. She's trying her best to convince all y'all about what's going on. Sometimes we all put in bills that are in theory. Well, I'm a human receipt and telling you about reality of what I've seen. Representative Mora, to her benefit, she went through a litany of folks, especially doctors, which, by the way, if it wasn't for a doctor or a nurse, I wouldn't be standing here today. Yeah, I got this third leg now, but I wouldn't be here if a doctor or a nurse said, Joe, this is what you gotta do. This is what's gonna happen to you. Be ready for it. Well, it happened, I accept it. I'm one of those like, okay, fine, let me go on with life. We're talking about doctors who do the one thing that there are police officers up here, retired and current, firefighters. The one thing we do, with all due respect to all the attorneys in here, we save lives for a living. How are we going to save those lives? You're going to save those lives by talking some of the former drug addicts who come to the finance committee, who are banging for grants, who are saying, look, we can save some lives. It's better to put somebody under our care with all the different agencies, drug agencies, Kodak and the morphine places, all over the city of Providence, never mind the state. It's trying to serve and to save their lives. There are a lot of drug dealers, a lot, that the Attorney General's office needs to step up, do what's right, use the laws on the books, maybe use our RICO Act, I don't know. But go after those that are really dealing down to the guy in the corner who's hustling for 2 reasons, maybe 3. Maybe he can't find a job because he tried not to go back to the joint, and the only thing he knows how to do is sell drugs.
30 seconds.
Or the only thing that he or she knows how to do is to feed their addiction. Let's save lives, all right, ladies and gentlemen. Let's save the lives that right now Representative Ray Hull's on the front line doing every day. Vote no on this bill.
Representative O'Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. First, let me say to Chairman Keable's point, if the Attorney General's office can only think of 2 cases in the last 10 years in which they would have attempted to use this bill, then I'd say that there's no immediate need to pass this today. And let me also say that the bill before us is a sub-A. It is, in my opinion, improved from the original. The original struck me as being mean-spirited, maybe even bloodthirsty. This version is better, and the inclusion of the amendment that we did at the beginning of this floor debate makes it even better. But it doesn't make it less misguided. And it's misguided because, while Chairman Keable explained a little bit about the testimony that we heard in committee, he didn't explain all of it. The chairman mentioned that we heard from experts in the field that many drug addicts share drugs among themselves, and that's what the First Amendment took care of. But what we also heard is that the line between buyer and seller in the addiction community is very blurry, and that one day's dealer is the next day's customer. And most of these people are trying to survive a dance with the devil and keep themselves alive. They are trying to feed their addiction in the face of an increasingly toxic supply chain. They aren't trying to kill anyone, to Rep. Hull's point. They're trying to stay alive. So I have an amendment that I would like to offer now, if it's the appropriate time.
It is. Proceed.
Thank you. The amendment is LC 00430-7-7.
Representative O'Grady moves amendment LC 004307/7. That is seconded by Representative Agello, Representative Walsh, Representative Hull, Representative Lombardi, Representative Chippendale, Representative Donovan, Representative Rangland-Vassell, Representative Regenberg, Representative Perez, Representative Almeida. Proceed, Representative.
Thank you, Speaker. What this amendment requires is that prosecutors show that there is an intent to harm, and that intent to harm needs to be present before charging under the purview of this bill. This limits the applicability to those vicious and indifferent dealers who are deliberately attempting to poison their customers that we all want to get at. And it shows mercy to those who are caught in the throes of an addiction and a craving that hopefully none of us in this room have personal experience with. And to get to another point that the chairman raised, that there are 35 other states that have a bill like this on their books. That really doesn't tell me anything. Because as anyone who has followed the line item veto debate knows, where there are 46 other states that have a line item veto, there are 46 different versions of that. And so I don't know how many of the 35 different versions of this bill have an intent to harm provision. But I'll bet it's not, I'll bet we wouldn't be the first if we voted for this. So I ask you to consider the points raised by Representative Hull. People that are going to get caught in this, they're not trying to kill people. Most of them aren't. So let's at least make prosecutors show that they are before we potentially sentence them to life. Thank you very much.
Whip Edwards. Oh. Chairman Craven.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to Representative O'Grady's amendment. I can speak to the law, but I'd rather really speak right now to my experience as a prosecutor. Can't prove this. Can't prove it. There is no way that there would be a reasonable belief that we would be passing a statute that ultimately would end up in a successful prosecution under some circumstance. This language says that you have to show that a person intended to cause harm or injury and had reason to know that the harm or injury was likely to occur as a result of the unlawful delivery to another person who ingests that. That is such a complicated fact pattern. That doesn't find itself anywhere in the narcotics laws at all. Nowhere. And remembering, in addition to the fact that we're all standing here now talking about an opioid crisis that has affected the number of people that, and I admit now, it's in my neighborhood as well. It wasn't before. But we're talking about something that didn't exist 7, 8, 9 years ago. Now it does. The fact patterns, the way this works, are extraordinarily complicated. The way drugs are being delivered to these kids and these young people is vastly different than it used to be. It used to be there was a guy on a corner or a guy who had a you know, kind of an apartment front. You knew where to go. That's not happening this way anymore. We've got to stop this.
Point of order. Point of order. I'm not sure which way I'm going.
What is your point of order, Representative Almeida?
If I'm wrong, I'll sit down, maybe. But the good representative said, and I'm paraphrasing, the opioid is now in his area. I just talked about cocaine and heroin being in my area. Why is it all of a sudden different based on the two areas?
That's not the point he's trying to make. Your point of order is overruled. Thank you, Representative. Proceed, Chairman.
I will. I grew up in the neighborhood that Representative Almeida represents. It's not my intention, but to say that it's different now, because it shouldn't be, and in my heart, it's not. I can tell you for the last 4 or 5 years since I had an opportunity to sponsor legislation, 6 years actually, I sponsored some of the better pieces of legislation that has addressed the opioid crisis. Good Samaritan statute, which gave people an opportunity to make a call and save a life. The Attorney General didn't like that legislation. He thought it was going to lead to an opportunity where people would get away with murder. The Governor's Justice Reinvestment Commission, the treatment that's associated with that, the diversion programs that are associated with that, to give people an opportunity who need to have someone address their problem with addiction as a sickness that's recognized, quite frankly, by the American Medical Association. But we need prosecutorial tools as well. This is a prosecutorial tool that I believe will be used with the discretion that both the courts as well as the sentencing judges in the event of a conviction or a plea will take into consideration all the things that not only I just suggested that was involved with some legislation that I was involved with, but embraced by the court, the very court we're talking about, and I'm asking you to have some faith in. This bill will be, this law, if passed, gutted, as I would say, under the circumstances of this amendment, would be almost impossible to prove. It wouldn't have any impact, and I ask you to vote down this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the chamber. I rise in support of this amendment. Let me just share a couple of things. Unless you live it, you have no clue about it. Delivery, it's no different today than it was yesterday, last year, the year before. I have seen it, I have witnessed it. It continues. More so, the low offenders are in it already, most of them serving their life sentence because they may have made a mistake during their lifetime. And because of that mistake, they can't get employment, they cannot get homes, they cannot get the bare essentials to survive or provide for their families. So the one means that they may have is to be able to get a hookup from the big daddy or the big mama that has access to quantity. And they, although it may be wrong, they see it as an opportunity to be able to provide for their needs. That here, we are not enabling them the opportunity because they made a mistake down the road. They are left without choices. And you know what? Most of all those individuals look like me. And you talk about leave it to the court's discretion. Leave it to the court's discretion. There are some gatekeepers up there that as soon as they see an individual coming through those doors, that is involved with drugs, they automatically make the decision of not being able to get an opportunity, or not understanding or listening and hearing what their situation may have been or is, and why they're in the position that they are in. Addiction is a disease, and we need to do more to try to help it. Listen, my condolences go out to Kristen's mother, her parents, her family, and to all the other families that are out there that have gone through this. But the pain of others didn't start after the person, the family member, died. They were going through hardship. I can just imagine the process that the parents, the husbands, the wives, the sisters, the brothers go through, ripping off your stuff to make sure that they get their next hit. Punishment, discretion, the court, accountable, really? Because I have made it my business to get familiar with some of the judges and some of the lawyers and some of the prosecutors, have come to know.
30 seconds.
To have, that's not 5 minutes, to have, and I'm not being disrespectful either,
30 seconds.
to have and to know their intentions, and to have a relationship with individuals that will in fact do what is realistically right. Putting out all this money and not into treatment, it's a shame. I'm gonna tell you right now, I can count them, I can see the judges, I can see the prosecutors sitting waiting to put them all up in there.
What's your point of order, Representative? Not one word for 5 minutes. Point of order is sustained.
Okay.
And time's up. 5 minutes were up. I am doing my best to let everybody speak, and everybody is going to speak every word that they want to speak. But we have an amendment before us, and Representative, respectfully, you were not on the amendment, the intent language. So let's please try to stay on the amendment, and then after we're done with the amendments, everybody can speak for as long as they'd like on the actual bill itself. So we have a bunch of lights on. Are they on the amendment? Whip Philippi, you're on the amendment. Whip Philippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be brief. Essentially, what this amendment does is it changes this crime from what's called a general intent crime to a specific intent crime. A general intent crime is where you intend to commit the act that's a crime. Specific intent is where you commit a criminal act with a certain mindset. And Representative Craven, Chairman Craven, stated that it would be very, very difficult to prove specific intent of the individual selling the drugs that they specifically intended to cause injury, and it would be almost impossible to convict someone under this amended statute. I don't necessarily agree with that. Some instances of specific intent crimes that are proven in our courts every day are first-degree murder, assault, burglary, robbery, larceny, forgery, false pretenses, embezzlement, solicitation, attempt, and conspiracy. So we prove specific intent crimes all the time. This would change this bill from a general intent crime to a specific intent crime, limit those subject to its provisions, and I think intelligently limit those subject to the provisions, because if we're putting people in jail for life, I think that we need to prove they intended to injure someone. I think that intent can be proven if you knowingly sell fentanyl to someone. Thank you.
Representative O'Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to Chairman Craven's objections, I want to point out the language that's contained on, I believe this is page 1, starting at line 17, which is 1123.7 Section B. This section applies not to the street dealer, but to the person from whom the street dealer acquired the drugs. And so to Whip Filippi's point, if the toxicology report that Representative Hull referred to comes back and shows 100% fentanyl, that is 100% deadly in 100% of the cases that it's ingested, then that, in my mind, would be specific intent and would be easily provable. Are there other lights on this bill, Mr. Speaker, on this amendment?
One other.
All right, then I'll speak one more time to wrap up after that. Thank you.
Representative Solomon.
I rise in opposition to this amendment. This amendment would intend to cause harm or injury as a result of the unlawful delivery. Drug dealers, the vicious drug dealers that we're talking about here, they don't intend to cause harm or cause injury. They intend to make money at the end of the day. So essentially, we would be eliminating them from this bill and not enforcing the law against these people. So we need to get these vicious drug dealers out of the system. We need to lock them up, and it's up to life. It's not a mandatory minimum sentence, it's only up to life. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All I wanted to get up and say, I apologize with regards to going off and not sticking to the amendment.
No apology necessary,
But
Representative.
the bottom line is, you know, when it comes to unfairness, that it's certainly thing I have to stand up for my people. Thank you.
Representative, that is certainly respected. It's very appreciated, and thank you for your argument. So I hope you get up again on the bill itself. So feel free, but let's just try to compartmentalize our arguments. But thank you. Representative O'Grady. Hold on, Representative. I got another light. You wanted to be last. Lita Morgan, are you on the amendment?
Yes.
Lita Morgan.
Thank you, Speaker. Can I ask a question of the of Representative O'Grady?
If he will yield, he will yield. Proceed.
I just have a question. Is callous disregard the same thing as what you're asking about? So someone could be selling fentanyl-laced drugs to make money, but if it's so callous that they don't care whether somebody dies, is it the same thing?
There would be, yes, I believe it would be. And certainly the situation that you've described is one that I would hope would be captured under intent to harm.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Representative O'Grady.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So let me wrap up by this, and I thank you all for listening to this debate. Before you vote on this amendment, I'd like you to run the following scenario through your head. You have a constituent, maybe a friend, and this person, this family, they have a child who you know is a good kid in his heart or her heart, but is misguided, has always kind of run with the wrong crowd, has always sort of been a handful. And I think we all have constituents like that. We probably all have friends like that, and some of us have family members that description would apply to. And let's say that suddenly they fall victim to addiction, and they find themselves someday exchanging a quantity of heroin with a friend of theirs for something of value, and that friend dies. They're captured under this law. They're now facing a potential life sentence. And you get a call from that constituent, from that friend, from that family member, and they say to you, Representative, my son, my daughter, they didn't intend any harm here. They're addicted. This is a friend of theirs that there was no intent to harm. How can they possibly be looking at life in prison? Well, do you want your answer to be because in 2018 I voted against an amendment that would have exempted them? Is that what you want your answer to be? It's not what I want my answer to be. So I ask you to keep that in mind when you vote on this amendment. Thank you.
There are no other lights on the amendment. Clerk, unlock the machine. All those in favor, please vote green. Those opposed, red. Clerk, lock the machine. 20 in favor, 49 opposed. The amendment fails. Back on the act. Representative Wrangler-Vassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just rise to say a couple things. One, there has been a lot of talk about the courts and the judge's discretion, but I want us to keep these two things in mind, or maybe more than a couple things in mind. All of us can look at right now the racial and ethnic makeup of our judicial system. My worthy colleague yesterday referenced it, and I know it's come up a lot of times today, but I just want us to think about this cerebrally. Let us ask ourselves the question and think about the racial and ethnic background of our judicial system right now. I also want us to keep in mind that the folks that are locked up for dealing drugs, and sadly, the folks that are no longer here, something that I have not heard brought up as yet, and it should be a part of this equation. It's the issue that we need jobs. There's no excuse for dealing drugs, absolutely zero. But we need to make sure that there is robust investment in core communities of color. We need to make sure that we're taking care of people who really need to buy food for their kids and pay their rent and exist like all of us. So in conclusion, because I don't want to be redundant, I don't want to be overbearing, but I really want us to think about the people that are locked up for life, many of them, and think about the discretion that the court system had and the discretion that was used, and let us look at the numbers, and that would be our answer. So I ask my colleagues to think about the communities that have been dismantled, torn apart. Think about the children. Think about the families who don't get up with their mom, don't get up with their dads. Some of them don't even know them because of the war on drugs. And so this, as I said before, in conclusion, is very complex. But we cannot be incarcerating our way out of it. We incarcerate too many people. We have not heard one thing about educating people about the harm of drugs and drug abuse. Why don't we put money into educating people? Why don't we do that? Why are we just throwing people in jail and throwing away the key? I don't know. I don't get it, but I ask everyone in here to please vote against this bill.
Representative Chippendale.
Thank you, Speaker. Over the last 8 years for me in this building, I too have been part of a lot of the legislation that's come out, as someone else earlier referenced. And I'd like to ask everyone to just thoughtfully reflect on the last decade as this war has, this epidemic rather, has raged on, and how we as a society, we as policymakers, we under the advice and the guidance of the medical and psychological community, we have adopted an entirely different approach to the opioid epidemic than all other drugs. We have worked diligently and extremely hard to eliminate the stigma associated with being addicted. I still get into arguments with people who it is not a disease, but we've made great progress over the years to get people to start to look at this as it is a disease. Let's stop blaming that individual. Let's stop blaming that person for their addiction. Let's remove the stigma so that they can seek treatment. We've made great steps to eliminate their fear of prosecution. We've done all of these things because we want people to get help. You can go to a fire station. They'll help you right away. I spoke of the Providence Center. There are so many good things we're doing, and they're all to embrace folks who are struggling. They're not to repel them. Life sentence, up to life in jail, repels folks. And I assure you that the person struggling with addiction does not even know what judicial discretion is, nor do they care. They don't know what a prosecutorial tool is, nor do they care. All they know is they have to keep feeding that addiction. They will get to a point, and we, again, as a society, have adopted a totally different approach. We're embracing them and saying, please, if you do have a problem, reach out. We will not shun you. We will not shame you. We will not apply a scarlet letter to your chest. We will lovingly embrace you and make sure you get the services you so desperately need. What this bill does, and I hate to disagree with Representative Hull, who I have the utmost respect for, who said this bill will do nothing. I say this bill will reverse the tide, reverse all of the good things we've done as a society, as policymakers, as people who want to solve this problem. And that is to eliminate the stigma. We're re-stigmatizing folks because now they're going to be afraid. Again, they don't know what judicial discretion is. They don't know what the totality of the facts are. It is a disease. We have to embrace people who are struggling with addiction to help get them to accept the help and ask for the help. This bill will have a chilling effect on all of the great progress that we've made to fight this epidemic that is going to rage on, as was stated earlier. But we have made progress. We've made inroads. 10 years ago, we weren't talking about Narcan. It wasn't around, I don't know. But we weren't talking about it. I remember vividly that debate when we were talking about Good Samaritan and the Narcan, the addition of Narcan, introduction of Narcan. That was a sea change in this disease. More people were saved. People who never would have been saved because they were no longer afraid to reach out. The person with them was no longer afraid of prosecution. They reached out. We're putting up that wall again, folks. We're putting up that wall that says you're a junkie and we don't love you. We don't care about you, and we don't care if you spend the rest of your life in jail. And we need to say, we understand you're addicted, we want you to reach out for help, and we want to help you. And we've made great strides to get there, and this is setting us back 2 steps for every step we've made in the positive direction. Thank you, Speaker.
Representative Lancia.
Thank you, Speaker. Just 4 really brief things that I picked up in this long conversation, this long debate. Someone said very early on, we wind up warehousing individuals. Representative Newberry raised the point about a 17-year-old, possibility of going to jail for life. Representative Canario said we need to remove the threat. As a former Navy chaplain, as an ordained minister, the other side for me is, what do we do about rehabilitating the threat? A 17-year-old warehousing people, removing, where is, somebody else also said we can make the bill better. Can we make the bill better for a 17-year-old who is not a vicious drug dealer, but it has become part of his or her lifestyle? So those are some things that I'm going to weigh when I take my vote on this bill. Thank you, Speaker.
Representative Lombardi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to thank my colleagues for the robust discussion that we've had this evening. And Speaker, I want to commend you at least for trying to address this scourge, this opioid epidemic that touches all of us. This thing has there's no social stratification for this. You can be very poor, you can be very rich. And I can tell you this here, having grown up in, a low socioeconomic neighborhood, this scourge was around for many, many years. It's there, and it's probably going to be around for a long, long time. And, we've all been touched, either personally, in our family, our friends, our colleagues, but in many instances, people that we work with. So, in my case, it would be as a teacher, as a coach, as an attorney, as a judge, and you see it every day. My heartfelt feeling towards Rep. McLaughlin and Rep. Walsh, who lost family members, and you heard two opposite sides, and very passionate, very compelling. I just want to touch on some things that maybe we didn't think about, and just very quickly, many drug-addicted people, they sell small amounts, and I'll tell you why they do it, to feed their habit. That's why they do it. They're not the high-level kingpin that I think we're trying to get at. Secondly, people who usually die from overdoses usually have other things going on. They have organ failure, they have other medication in them. And by the way, just because someone's shooting heroin, I remember, in my neighborhood, people were shooting up sleeping pills and speed. They were cooking it, they were crushing it, they were snorting it, they were skin popping it. That's the reality of discourage. That's the reality of it, in case you don't know. And thirdly, something, we've had this drug policy for many, many years. Just say no, just do this, just stand on your head, just go and, go chase a butterfly. And guess what? It's been an abject failure. That's what it's been. Some of us who practice law, we think some of these holding patents for some of these people are already there. Intent to sell, the actual sale. And in most instances, the judges will hold them. So, we think it's there. But I'll tell you what we haven't talked about, and we should put our passion into this, and we should put our commitment into this. 3 things. And you've heard nearly nothing on it. Education, counseling, and treatment. Why aren't we talking about that? We should be talking about that ad nauseum. We've heard about the worst case scenarios. We understand that. That's what it's all about. I saw a picture of a penny with a small amount of fentanyl. Okay, I get it. Totally get it. But guess what? If you have a predisposed heart condition, your heart may explode when you shoot it. That's how this thing works. I remember a guy shot his fingers off shooting heroin, and that was about 50 years ago. We're talking about people with addiction. They'll do anything. They'll sell their children. They'll sell their body. They'll sell whatever they have. They'll rob their mother. They'll rob their father. They'll rob their siblings. They'll rob anybody. And why? To get that high that they've been chasing. Because you know what? You see heroin addiction, you almost get hooked the first time you do it. Because after that, you're chasing that. You're chasing it. You're never going to get there. And that's what the problem is. I was just, another aspect is, I was thinking about, just think, 5 more years in prison. I looked at the DOC numbers, 63,000 a year.
30 seconds.
5 more years, 315,000, 20 people, 6.3 million. Let's put it into education. Let's put it into counseling. Let's put it into treatment. And guess what? A majority of those, people from the black community. That's right. That's the way this goes. Minority community. So especially those that who represent the poorer communities or minorities, just think long and hard before you vote yes on this. And I want to close by saying this. Simply stated, the medical, the public health, and recovery community stands against this. I wonder why. But most importantly, keep this in the back of your mind.
Time.
Revenge is not the answer to this crisis.
Representative Canario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, real quick, please let's not lose sight of what this bill does. We all are very passionate about this item. We've said that, all of us have said that. But let's remember one thing. We can stand here and talk about counseling and education, which is very important. But you know something? That's after the fact. We're chasing the fish upstream. Education and counseling is after the fact that these people obtain the drugs. We have to remove the threat, simply said. We just can't keep chasing and helping these folks, which they need, because they've already accessed the drugs. We can educate and we can counsel, but we're going the wrong way. This bill goes the right way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hey, Bob, I apologize to you. But now, man, just hear me out. I apologize to you. Because the minute I start hearing a couple of words, and I'm paraphrasing the good man, or my neighborhood, hang on a minute here. Drugs has no color. But the point of my first conversation was the war on drugs didn't work. And the same heroin and the same cocaine drug dealers that got locked up without this bill, why can't it be done today? I don't get it. It's very suspicious. I know one thing, in the black community, we sure are not bringing it here by plane or by boat, and it surely isn't us. I'm concerned that if we have all this money of people we're going to lock up, we're going to spend a lot of money, but it's true. We need to put that money into education. We need to put that money into rehab. But have you noticed a recent commercial, and I'm going to paraphrase that commercial, where it says, did you teach your kid everything? Did you? And it shows the kid holding a bag of weed and a bottle of Heineken. That is drug prevention. Get to it before it starts. Drug prevention is not after, it's also before and during. And the way we were always taught, that the judicial system is a big circle, and there is no beginning, there is no end. Everybody's got to be involved. So let's give the money to the rehab people so they can do one more step and get there before these kids do what they're about to do. You made those arrests with heroin and cocaine back then. Why can't that formula be used today? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lita Morgan.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm having a hard time understanding why we have this bill in front of us, because I don't see how it changes what we're already doing. If you're a high-level drug dealer, you already get life in prison. So just putting a scarier word on it doesn't really change what we're doing already, except that it may extend it down, this scary word, murder, may extend it down to people who really had no intention of doing harm. We already, our courts, our prosecutors already have the ability to get the high-level drug dealers, charge them, and put them away for life. So I get it, it's a scarier word, it makes a statement, and I think all of us want to make that statement. Anybody who is selling fentanyl-laced drugs to anybody is a horrible person, and they should go away for life. But we don't have the death penalty here. It's not like because we charge them for murder, they're going to get double life. You can only serve one life sentence. So I'm not really sure, and no one has explained why this is before us, because we already severely deal with the high-level drug dealers. If anyone has more to add to that, I'd like to hear it. Why is this before us? Why are we making this a murder charge when we already can put people away for life? Thank you.
Whip Philippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thought I was done, but to anyone who would be voting for this bill, based on the belief that you're going to get drugs off the street, you are sorely mistaken. If there is a demand, there will be a supply. We are not going to eliminate any threat. They can't even keep drugs out of prison. How on earth do we think we're going to keep them off the streets? Have you driven by the Newark port, Long Beach port in LA, Oakland port? You're not keeping drugs out of this country. You have to eliminate the demand. You will never eliminate the supply if there's a demand. This will not eliminate the threat. You want to eliminate the threat, eliminate the demand. You eliminate the demand through counseling, education, compassion, love. Not the heavy hand of jail and government. Thank you.
Chairman Keable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank all my colleagues for the vigorous debate we've had on the floor. I've heard a lot of great things, and we've touched on many numerous points, and all of them are important, all of them are germane and relevant to this discussion. But I just want to bring everybody's attention back to the fact that this bill is about what happens when you sell drugs and somebody dies. We have a dead person here in this scenario, okay? Last week, there were 40 bodies in the state morgue. 18 of them were there on overdoses. 18 of them. We are trying to help people. We are trying to help families who are dealing with this, families that don't want to see it happen to them. We want the dealers to know that we take this seriously, that you're going to be prosecuted, that what you are doing is hurting society. It's hurting families. We're trying to help people with this. Please, all very important issues. This is a large, complex issue. This bill is not going to solve all problems. I agree with that. But it is a tool. It is one tool in the toolbox, a tool we need, a tool this state should have, a tool that says to families, we care and we're trying. Please keep all of that in mind. Please keep in mind that we are dealing with a situation where someone has died because of the delivery of drugs when you vote on this bill.
Representative McLaughlin.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I just want to conclude and just say, you know, until you've lost a loved one and seen the hell that they've gone through, okay, and a brother with no veins left in his arms, all right, I urge you people to support this bill, because one less drug dealer that's off the street, okay, might save one person, all right? And you know what I'm sick and tired of hearing, and this is not germane to the subject, so I'll probably get shut down, but I'm sick and tired of hearing the drug war, we're losing the drug war. Well, guess what? We got a lot of people on the front lines putting their ass on the line every single day to protect you people, okay? And I'm sick and tired of just hearing people say, okay, that the drug war is lost. Guess what? The drug dealers love to hear that. So with that said, thank you for this.
Representative Lancia.
Again, I'm struck by the use of the term drug dealer, vicious drug dealer. Representative Newberry raised the point that it could be a 17-year-old young person who could wind up potentially going to prison for life. And yes, we remove a threat, but then what happens once we remove that threat? Where does that person go? I think Representative Walsh used the word warehousing someone. We're talking about doing a bunch of things before. Great, but we may not have the opportunity to do that. What happens once that person goes to prison? Where is that person going to wind up, and what's their hope for the future? The person that's not a vicious drug dealer, person that's not a dealer, say a 17-year-old. That's my concern, again, in the spheres I travel. So that's my concern. Warehousing people, a young person, maybe at the age of 17, removing a threat? What about rehabilitating that supposed threat? So that's what I keep struggling with this bill. Thank you.
Last light, Leader Shikachi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to echo what Chairman Keable said, thank everybody for a very spirited, passionate debate this afternoon on a very important issue that everybody has points of view. But Leader Morgan, you asked a question. You said, why are we doing this bill today? Well, I'll tell you, it's a very good question. I hope to give you a very good answer. The Attorney General asked for this bill. The Police Chief of Cranston asked for this bill. And many of the police chiefs of Rhode Island asked for this bill because they view this as a tool. And Representative Filippi, not to scare people on the way down the chain, but to intimidate people on the way up the chain so we can go after the people who are causing this, who are making money. This isn't intended to go after the drug sharer or the drug user, but to go after the person who's selling the drugs, who's trafficking the drugs. The police, the Attorney General need this tool, and I'm prepared to vote yes on this tool. Representative Newberry, you gave us a scenario. It was a very good scenario about two 17-year-olds. Well, if two 17-year-olds in your scenario and one uses drugs with the other one and he's charged with murder, you know, because you're a very good lawyer, as I know, that more than likely that person, if not always, will get waived into the Superior Court and he would be eligible for the discretion of the judge. Let's talk about what we're voting on today, ladies and gentlemen. What we're voting on today, and this is a debate that is, as I can say, about a few bills that has been happening, so I want to focus on this. We're voting on what's before us today, the blue language on the bill in front of us, not the black language. The black language is already existing law. The red language is what we're striking out, and the blue language is what we're putting in. So everyone talks about 1123-6 and how good it is or how bad it is. That's already existing law. That's been a law for a long time, and we're not changing that. Making some minor modifications, but the ultimate spirit of that section stays the same. What we're changing or adding to is 1123-7 as amended. Amended out of committee in a sub-A, amended on the floor today, which allows discretion by the judge. Nobody who's going to vote red on this bill, including me, thinks this is going to solve the problem. It's not intended to solve the problem. It's intended to assist, to be a tool for the Attorney General, for the police department, to go after the drug pushers and traffickers. It's not intended to hurt the individual drug user, the person who's addicted. And yes, we need education, but we're giving it. Yes, we need treatment, and we're giving it. And maybe we can make an argument at another time, but not on this bill, that we could do more for that area. But this is a good bill. This attacks the problem. Does it solve the problem? No. But if we pass this bill, and the Senate has already passed a very, very similar version, the governor's committed to signing this bill, we have given our community another tool to go after the drug pushers, traffickers. Remember that. This is not in any way lessening the commitment that we have as a body, Chairman Keable said, in the bills that we've passed regarding justice reinvestment, regarding treatment, regarding counseling, regarding some of the bills we passed this year regarding opioids, the limited prescriptions, the voluntary opt-out if you're doing surgery before you do it in there, the revocation of that. Those are all good bills, and so is this. This is another tool in the war, in the fight on our society, on our children. Let's not forget that. I want to conclude, Mr. Speaker, with one data point. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, more than 35 states have statutes that provide for criminal liability in a drug overdose death. The federal government in 20 states have drug-induced homicide statutes in some capacity. In fact, if a delivery resulting in death was charged under federal law today, the deliverer would be subject up to life imprisonment with a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. So this bill is not anywhere near as harsh as the federal statutes. It's a good bill, Mr. Speaker, and I urge all my colleagues to vote accordingly in the affirmative. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I do agree that this bill is another tool that will be used against the low offenders. Again, the majority of you, are not looking at both sides. Yes, we need to address the problem. The problem is not going after some of these individuals who are trying to survive and are also suffering from addiction. This tool is another tool that's going to be utilized against the community of color. This tool is going to increase the number of individuals incarcerated that come from the poor community. This tool is not going to assist in addressing the addiction problem. I don't have the experience of losing a loved one from addiction, but I have had many opportunities to see people who are addicted and are going through this that wish they could shake it. But the services are not there available. They're not being properly funded. This tool is not for everybody. This tool should have been allowed everybody at the table for discussion. The intent may be the best, however, it is definitely slanted. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind. We already have incarcerated one for life, the entire of their family. You talk about there's no death penalty here in the state of Rhode Island? Well, bingo, this is it. This is it. It's not just that one individual that will be incarcerated, but their entire family will be incarcerated. They too will be serving a life sentence, even though their effort has been to try to assist that addicted family member out of that whirlwind. This is not, and it's gonna pass. We all know it. It's gonna pass. But what I'm gonna watch and what I'm gonna ask the community of color to watch and the university to watch and all these entities that are against this bill to watch and see how many numbers of individuals of color are going to be arrested and be given life sentences because of this new tool that you all are voting in favor of this day. That is going to be the data that is going to tell the tale sign about this new tool. Jim Crow, baby. Jim Crow. It doesn't change. It's just another day. Oppression at its best. Mark my words. Mr. Speaker, this is nothing against you. Nothing whatsoever. The contents of my presentation on this floor is because reality is true in my community, in the poor community. This is a day in and day out survival. Like I said, many of these low offenders are in a life sentence, living a life sentence because they can't get work, they can't get training because the mistake that they may have done 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. They have to survive. They too have an American dream, but unfortunately, tools like this keep them from achieving it.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. And anyone who feels that my presentation, my heartfelt, not emotional, is disingenuous, what is yours? Thank you.
There are no other lights. Clerk, unlock the machine. All those in favor, please vote green. Those opposed, red. Has everybody in their seats voted? Clerk, lock the machine. 55 in favor, 14 opposed. The act prevails.